Well, welcome everybody. My name is Roger Durling. I'm the executive director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And today we have quite a stellar group of talent here, all led by Prospero himself, the writer, director Aaron Sorkin, and his film, The Trial of the Chicago Seven. And I was mentioning before we went on air that we have everybody in the room has so much hardware. We have Academy Award winner Eddie Redmayne, who plays Thomas Hayden. We have Sacha Baron Cohen, who plays Abby Hoffman, Oscar nominated for Borat. Then we have Jeremy Strong, who plays Jerry Rubin. And Jeremy just won an Emmy Award for Best Actor. And then we have Yahya Abdul-Mateen, who plays Bobby Seale, who just won Emmy as well for Best Supporting Actor. So welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm going to jump right in with Aaron that this is his second directing, and I was mentioning to him that you've really come into your own as a director, and we've always been impressed, of course, with your protean screenwriting, but the directing this time around is just amazing. And I just wanted to ask you about, I was impressed the fact that there's three narratives happening at once. You have the trial, you have the riots, and then you have this brother relationship between Tom and Abby. Can you talk about the convergence of those three narratives?
Sure. Well, you just did a pretty good job of doing it yourself. That it's after a lot of research, because I knew nothing about the Chicago Seven when I started this. After reading a dozen or so books that have been written, some of them by the defendants, a 21,000-page trial transcript, but most critically, the time I spent with Tom Hayden, who was alive when I started this. He passed away a few years ago. Is what gave me a look into the personal tension between Tom and Abby, two guys on the same side who want the same thing, who plainly can't stand each other, and each thinks that the other is harming the cause. What I was going to say was, after the research, there's the period of just pacing around and climbing the walls and trying to figure out exactly what story you're going to tell. The film organized itself into three stories, what you just said: the courtroom drama, the evolution of the riot. How did what was supposed to be a peaceful protest evolve into such a violent clash with the police and with the National Guard? And then finally, this personal story between Tom and Abby. And I decided I'd tell those three stories at the same time and hope for the best.
And working with Papa Michael, I was noticing the visual differences in the riots have a specific look, and then there's a big contrast with the courtroom. Can you talk about those choices?
Sure. There was a lot of discussion of those choices before we started. There was a lot of planning involved, particularly when it came to the riots. The riots, the two riot sequences, are really why it took so long to get the film made, because they were budget busters. They were no one could figure out how to do the riots within the limited budget that we were going to have to make this film. Working with Fade and Papa Michael, our DP, working with Alan Baumgarten, our editor. And because we were able to shoot those scenes in Grant Park and on Michigan Avenue, where they actually took place, we were able to go through hundreds of hours of file footage, archival footage, news footage, and figure out what shots we would need to get to be able to marry those two things together and make the kind of sequence that we wanted to make. It helped that it was night. It helped that there was, I hate to be glib about this, but it helped that there was tear gas, that there was smoke that we could shoot light through, that we could get silhouettes from, and create the illusion of there being more people and more chaos than there was. That's how we did it.
Mm-hmm. And I was so impressed with Alan's work in, you know, the editing, especially in the opening sequence, that it grabs your writing, and the musicality is matched with the editing. Can you talk about working with Alan?
Yeah, sure. And it was working with Alan in concert with working with Daniel Pemberton, our composer, who needed to score that whole thing. To begin with, what I had told everyone from the beginning is that this film isn't about 1968, it's about today. We didn't know yet how much about today it was going to be when we were filming it. But I didn't want anyone to lean into the iconography of the 60s. So we weren't going to see a lot of peace signs, a lot of tie-dyed shirts, and musically it wasn't going to be the 60s protest songbook. That it was going to be a contemporary orchestral film score. And that prologue, what you're talking about, is an opening number. It needed to do two things. It needed to set the stage, a nation coming off the rails in 1968, with the escalating draft calls, with the escalating casualties in Vietnam, with the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and the temperature rising, leading up to the convention, while Daley on the other side is cranking up law enforcement, bringing in more and more riot police, more and more National Guard. So it needed to do that while also introducing our principal characters and doing it in a way that said, these guys aren't all of the same stripe. They don't all easily fit into the stereotype of a hippie.
Mm-hmm. Sacha, I actually read that your thesis at university was about radical Jews and the civil rights movement, correct? And I was wondering how that helped you understand Abbie Hoffman.
Yes, actually, when I was at Cambridge, my thesis was on Jewish involvement in the Black civil rights movement from 60 to 67. And actually, the character of Abbie was crucial for my thesis. And I don't want to bore everyone listening to this, but there was the historiography at the time assumed that there was something called a Black Jewish Alliance, which was that the Jewish communities, Jewish lawyers, Jewish philanthropists, and Jewish activists all gathered together as one group and helped out the Black community to ensure there was, voting rights for that community. But what I found out was actually through studying people like Abbie Hoffman, and Abbie was one of that group, was actually that this was a phenomenon. So there were these different Jewish groups, the Jewish radical students, of which Abbie was one, the Jewish organizations, and the Jewish lawyers and philanthropists all intersected at that point. So rather than it being an inherent affinity with, oppressed African Americans, it was actually a unique occurrence. And so actually Abbie was mentioned in my thesis because I demonstrated that what happened there was that was the issue for Jewish radicals at the time. So in the early 60s, it was Black civil rights. And then Abbie and his group, the very same group who went down to join the Freedom Rides in 1961, then went on to lead the anti-Vietnam War protest movement. And if you look around the courtroom, a number of the key leading figures there, the lawyers and the activists, are the same Jewish radicals who were involved with the Black civil rights movement. So yes, so this was, I'd been aware of Abbie Hoffman and fascinated and inspired by him since the age of 20.
Wow. Wow. Jeremy, your performance is so expressive. This character is such an expressive man, and it's something I've never seen you see, a role like this. Can you, talk to us about embodying him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very liberating to be in Jerry Rubin's shoes for me. Most of the time these days, I've been working on something that's quite controlled and internal. So Jerry is very expressive and believed in what he saw as the politics of ecstasy. And so there's a sense of there's a sense of the merry prankster about Jerry and Abby, and they were using dissent and humor and guerrilla theater to sort of give a platform to their ideology. But they were doing it in a way that was, I think, very, very vivid and colorful. Jerry Rubin was someone who went in front of the House American On Activities Committee dressed as Santa Claus and dressed as an American Revolutionary soldier. And so you're trying to find a way into that key. Aaron's writing sort of gives you a feast. And then you try and, I think, create an entire life around it so that you feel like that character, you could turn the camera around 360 degrees and follow that character to any situation, not just the situation they happen to be in our script. So the job is trying to sort of, as you say, kind of distill that essence and then unleash that energy in the work.
Yahya, you were born in Oakland, correct? And raised in Oakland, and so was Bobby.
Born in New Orleans, yeah, and raised in Oakland.
In Oakland, can you tell us about that connection with Bobby?
Oh yeah, sure. When I first opened the script and went through those words, I knew that this was something that I had to do. Bobby Seale is an extremely charismatic, loud, outspoken figure in Oakland. Bobby Seale can be seen and actually still giving lectures now, actually, doing guest lectures, across the city of Oakland, still running off his same riffs from the 1960s and in the 1970s. Very politically gifted mind, charismatic figure in the community. I grew up actually about 6 or 7 blocks from DeFermi Park, which was the site of a lot of the Black Panthers programs, and so this was a role for me that was, instilled with a lot of hometown pride. It was something that I said, I really want to, step into these shoes and really try to knock this out of the park and do it for the hometown, and it was an opportunity for me to, represent a lot of the things that I felt that Bobby Seale, valued, humanness, dignity, morals, a political minded righteousness, speaking up for his own self and his community and defending his own manhood, and for Black empowerment, but not only Black empowerment, but for empowerment of all people. I was really, really fortunate to be able to step into those shoes and to bring the words that Aaron, brought to life, and speaking on behalf of a lot of the issues that that Bobby Seale chose to take up on in his life.
Mm-hmm. I actually want to follow up a question with you, Yahya, that Bobby, I was really impressed with your performance, that there is this quiet aspect to him, as well as an intensity. Mm-hmm. And, can you talk to us about balancing those two aspects of him?
Yeah, so, well, Bobby, he was in prison, during that trial. And he was the one on trial who didn't get a chance to go home, who was not going home who wasn't going home after the day. At the end of the day, he would stand up and They put him back in the handcuffs and take him back to the van, take him back to prison, you know, where he suffered different types of abuses. So, you know, I think Bobby was a person who actually felt the stakes every single day. He was already in prison. When there was the threat of going to prison, he was already in prison. He was already silenced, and it was, you know, he was constantly under the circumstance of life and death, you know. And so I think that required a certain type of stillness. It required a certain type of focus, where there was nothing that could take the edge off. He's also a Black man in the 1960s and the 1970s, where the government will, without any qualms, will kill you if you make too much noise. So I believe that there was something on his shoulders where he had to really dig deep down and get in touch with his conviction and with his moral conviction and his moral courage. I think courage is a word, you know, that I land upon often when I'm talking about this film, when I'm talking about this role, you know, making sure that your voice is heard, but making sure that that you have the courage to live up to or to deal with the repercussions of speaking your voice, you know, and of being in that moment, which a lot of times for Bobby, it required him to be silent. It required him to speak up, and every act within that courtroom was actually, I believe, an act of courage, and an act of conviction, you know.
Yeah, Eddie, I noticed, I mentioned to Aaron earlier that I've seen the film quite a few times, and I noticed that humor is I mean, it's used in your character. I almost see it as an entryway to Tom. You start noticing his charisma with the usage of humor. Of course, it's not as flashy as Abby's, and you know, can you talk about that, about the humor in the script?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. First time humor in any performance I've ever done have been connected. No, do you know what? It is something actually that Aaron and I spoke about, because here's a tricky thing. You get sent a script by someone like Aaron Sorkin, who I admire deeply, and it was a pretty beautiful, flawless thing. But you're also hired to perhaps bring your skill set or your take on things to it. And one of the things Aaron and I talked about early was, you know, Tom, in the way that Aaron organized the film, he is the the sort of antithesis of Abby. He is perhaps straighter and more suit and tied than he actually was, because it plays out that that dynamic and infuses the drama with more. But gradually he's a listener. You know, he's quiet throughout the court cases, but gradually he sort of his character builds through the film, and of course he has this moment at the end. But what was important to me was that you saw in those early moments glimpses of charisma, because his charisma was so extraordinary, but it was a quiet charisma. If you ever watch on YouTube his speeches, he had extraordinary rhetorical capabilities, but they drew people to him. There was almost a monotony or a lyrical monotony to the way he spoke when he was speaking to huge crowds. He never was reaching out. He let people kind of come to him, but because Aaron was creating such a sort of palette of colors in this thing, you needed to make sure that an essence of that charisma came through, and humor felt to both of us like the way that so he did write a few little observations, as it were, to Tom that kind of bolstered his but I don't know if I managed to make them laugh out loud funny, but
you absolutely did. Mission accomplished.
Aaron, another geeky question. I was the courtroom, the set, the wood, it's very imposing, and it has a gravity to it. You know, can you talk about the set design and the importance of having that massive courtroom?
Sure. First, I'll say that our production designer was Shane Valentino, and he built that entire courtroom inside of a church in Paterson, New Jersey. And the reason why we needed to do that, the real courtroom, our courtroom didn't look anything like the real courtroom. The real courtroom is unimpressive. It's much smaller. It's post-war architecture. It just kind of looks like a small junior high school meeting room, kind of like the O.J. Simpson courtroom. And I wanted, first of all, knowing how much time we were going to be spending in there, it needed to be, there needed to be some visual interest in it, something for Faden to shoot and for us to light. But mostly I wanted it to be imposing. I wanted us to feel the weight of the federal government coming down on these people. I wanted the sound in there to have that kind of an echo. And if we're saying the whole world is watching, I wanted to be reminded all the time that the whole world was watching.
Mm-hmm. This is actually, I'll start with Sacha, but I would love to hear the other actors chime in as well, is that, you know, Aaron's scripts are very precise, and there's a musicality to it. And were you allowed to improvise? Were you allowed to take liberties with Mr.
Oh yeah, the script was a suggestion. It was a jumping off point, right, guys?
I didn't know. I actually didn't know there was a script. I mean, you know, the reason why you have some of the greatest actors in the world and me in this movie is because Aaron is, you know, the modern day Shakespeare. He's a lot, in fact, a lot more consistent than Shakespeare. He's never had a Titus Andronicus. And we, you know, everyone wants to say those words. And he also, by the way, incidentally turned out to be a brilliant director. He'll never admit it. He's actually incredibly modest. I was surprised that Aaron agreed to have me in the movie because I'm known for my improvisation, but it was wonderful having, you know, this incredibly precise guide and trying to, you know, wobble it a little bit. And, you know, Aaron was always ready to, once he'd got everything that he wanted, he was always ready for me and Jeremy to try one or a couple that were, you know, interpretations of his perfect script. And it really was a perfect script. So that was very nice of him. And yeah,
my pleasure.
And did any of those wobbly scene interpretations make it to the film?
Well, listen, you know. Oh.
No, Aaron, you know. I mean, you know what we.
Well, I was going to say that there were several moments throughout the film where I'd say, guys, you know, mess it up a little bit, dirty it up. There was a little room for that.
I think Roger, I think our aim, right, when you have a script that's that perfect and you have a limited budget, is to give the director as many possibilities, the most amount of possibilities in the edit. So we know that we can't, this isn't a Martin Scorsese movie where we can shoot for 6 months. It's a very tight budget. And so the idea is, you know, what I certainly tried to do was every take I wanted to give a different interpretation so that Aaron had some choices in the edit. Whether the rest of them were useful, I don't know, but that was what I was trying to.
Yes, they were useful, very useful.
I think it's always a very healthy creative tension, you know, on the set with any director, really. And I had the privilege of working on Aaron's first film, and sort of similarly played a pretty volatile character and needed to at times not feel straitjacketed to the precision of a text. And I think that, I think in a way that the tightrope that you need to walk is that you actually need to adhere entirely to the precision of the text, while also filling it in with life. And so you're bringing a little bit of jazz to a very classical thing. But I think your job as the actor is to, is to take the writing and, it's what you can't do in the theater that you can do in film. You can actually discover things in the moment, and that can be captured and interrogated by a camera. And that's not something you can really prescribe. So in a way, you're following this roadmap of the text, but you also have to find a certain freedom, I think, within that parameter.
Eddie, you obviously did a lot of research, and there is a lot of Tom Hayden that we can see, archives, etc. Video. How much leeway did you have to create your own thing? Your own version of Tom Hayden.
We massive leeway, and I would say that this is, if you look at that footage of Tom, I don't look anything like Tom Hayden. I think Sacha and I had discussions with Aaron early about makeup things and that, but this wasn't the film for that. There wasn't the budget or the time to really be sort of going into that world of verisimilitude, I suppose. And so Aaron said on day one, this is a painting, not a photograph, and I want it to be your version and his version of this person. So what I tend to do is just, like, the joy of doing what we do is you get to immerse yourself in a world which I knew very little about, and do as much, collate as much research as you. There were amazing courtroom sketches actually from this case, which was interesting for physicality. But you do all that sort of stuff, and then basically you throw it away and you just play opposite this great troupe with these wonderful words. So I think what ends up happening is that sort of like 1% of all the homework you do ends up on screen. But as Alfred Molina, wonderful actor I worked with once, said, no one wants to see your homework anyway. So, So Aaron gave us lots of freedom.
Yeah, well, Alfred Molina and you in Red, one of the best performances I've seen on stage.
Well, thank you. That's
pretty unbelievable. Jeremy, do you have a similar question about how much leeway did you feel that you had to create the character?
Well, I was playing a character who was a very, while he was a peace activist, he was quite an oppositional person, and who was not afraid to be sort of held in contempt of court. And so I felt a sort of moral and creative imperative to risk being in contempt of court, to channel that defiant spirit of Jerry Rubin. Who was a kind of, who's kind of, someone described him as a militant Lysander. So there was a lot of hijinks and pranks on set and noisemakers, and as much as I could do, I think, to try and fill in do filigree work within what Aaron had written. These were guys who were part of the counterculture, and they, tried to levitate the Pentagon and had, pin the rubber on the Pope at the Festival of Life down the block from the convention. And so you try and bring a little bit of that spirit into the world of the film, as well as their deadly seriousness when it came to racial aggression at home and imperialist aggression abroad. So bringing that to the riots as well. We'd all watched Haskell Wexler's film. We'd all watched all the footage of those riots, and it was quite harrowing to be in the real place where it happened, screaming at real Chicago police officers.
Yahya, one of the incredible scenes in the film. One of the many incredible scenes is where you're bound and gagged, you know, and your character remains with so much dignity throughout that scene. Can you tell us about that scene?
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you know the point about his dignity is something that you picked up throughout that scene. You know, Bobby was is a character, you know, a man who I think he prides himself on his dignity, his humanness, his manhood. You know, and I'm also an actor who believes that every good story is a love story, and a love story between an idea or an ideal or a person that a character is deeply in love with, and then you have an opposition that is attempting to take that thing away. And so dignity was one of the things that I put at the top of my list. You know, Bobby's manhood, his dignity, his humanness was some of the ideas and ideals that he was deeply attached to. Oh, I'm sorry, I heard something at my door, pardon me.
Oh,
and
no
so,
worries.
and so I wanted to make sure that was always intact. You know, that his dignity was always intact, even in the face of oppression. You know, Bobby speaks about knowing the psychology of your oppressor and knowing that the very thing that they would do to you is the very thing that they themselves fear having done to them. You know, and so in order to defeat your oppressor, one must not show weakness, or one must not be defeated by the tools of the oppressor. You know, and so I knew that it was very important for me to walk through those moments with my head up and to show pride, and to, you know, and to not be defeated, because I would be beat down, I would be silenced, and I would be humiliated, but my character and my dignity was something that I could control. I couldn't control what was being done to my own person, to my own physical body, but I could control my mind state. I could always protect my pride and my humanity, which was, you know, what he went to Chicago to do in the first place, was to speak as an ally for the pride, for the humanity, for the dignity of Black, brown, and oppressed people across the country. So that was really just an extension of his goal, of the goal that he set foot into Chicago with in the first place, I believe.
Aaron, you started writing this, you know, way before, and then by the time the film got released, you know, it has gotten this whole power added to it because of the times. And then I mean, I've told you, I've seen it a few times, and I started watching it again last night, and after the election has added even more power to the film. Did you ever imagine that the immediacy, it would keep growing to
No, I didn't imagine, and I'm not sure that anyone or that many people could imagine. Look, when I started doing this, it was just it was a good story to tell. I thought this was, you know, I thought this could be a good movie. And then things started to change a few years ago when Donald Trump at his rallies began to get nostalgic about the old days when they'd carry that guy out of here on a stretcher, and I'd like to beat the crap out of him. And there was, you know, dissent was being demonized. And that was the atmosphere that we were making the film in last winter. We thought it was plenty relevant when we were making it last winter. We didn't need it to get more relevant. But then I think it was in May that George Floyd was killed, and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And so protests in Kenosha and Seattle and Lexington and Washington, D.C. and around the country, protesters were being met again by police nightsticks, tear gas, and it was a chilling return to 1968. So, like I said, we thought the film was plenty relevant when we were making it. We didn't need it to get more relevant, but it did.
Eddie, we've talked about the musicality of Aaron's work, and when I watched the movie with 11 main characters, it does feel like an orchestra. Can you tell us what it was like to be on set with all these powerhouses, actors?
It was a real joy. It's so rare, even if you do an ensemble piece, that there are scenes in which you're all there continuously in the same room shooting for 3 months, 2 months, 2 months. And I think it was Frank Langella who said, sitting up on high in his thing, going, I don't. He said to us, treasure this, because this doesn't happen very often. And I feel like we all did. Aaron cast it in such a sort of ingenious way that you had all these different processes, of different actors with different techniques. And it felt like it was this piece of music, but it was sort of jazz meeting punk, meeting classical, and it fueled this extraordinary thing. I was given my first job ever by Mark Rylance. So getting to work with him again years later. Sacha and I had worked together before as like completely different on Les Miserables. And so people I'd worked with before to people like Yahya and Jeremy who I hadn't. It genuinely day to day felt like, and having, I always have this slight paranoia because I didn't go to drama school, that it's basically by osmosis that you kind of learn stuff. And you don't just learn about the acting side of things, you learn about how you behave on set, how you live your life happily out in this crazy world that we exist in. And it was extraordinary for that. And it was a really wonderful troupe of people. And I loved every minute. And I agree with Frank's words that I'd love to do it all over again.
Aaron, 11 major roles. You have been known for people in a room talking, and then all of a sudden here you have lots of action and lots of actors. Can you tell us about that evolution for you as a director?
Yeah, same thing as a writer. I'm much more comfortable inside four walls. When you bring a new puppy home, they say that you're supposed to get a crate that's just big enough for the dog to be able to turn around in, but no bigger, because that sense of claustrophobia gives them comfort. And I'm sorry for comparing myself to a cute puppy, but I'm that way.
I just got a puppy 2 months ago, so I can relate to that crate.
Okay, you can relate to the crate story.
Yeah.
So that's why mostly I write people talking in rooms. In this film, not only were there going to be, as you pointed out, 11 principals, but there are battle scenes in this movie, and I'd never done anything like that. Listen, I surround myself with people who are very good at their jobs, and somehow we're able to develop a vocabulary, an expert and someone who could not pick a long lens out of a police lineup. But we, like I said, we choreographed those battle scenes. A lot of thought went into them, and it ended up working.
I just want to throw in, because I think Aaron is modest about his sort of directorial capacity, but there is a feeling of, Aaron has been such a sponge in terms of, he spoke about things he had learned working with Mike Nichols, working with Fincher, working with Danny Boyle, working with Bennett Miller. He's worked with all of these incredible directors, and, talk about osmosis. He has sort of forensically learned so much from them, so that he does have that grammar with individual actors, and he is able to be a conductor to these 11 different people, all who are first chairs in a different orchestra, and he's able to somehow, sort of lead all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It is true that I've gotten a chance to work with great directors. I'm not done wanting to work with great directors, and I've been able to learn from them.
Mm-hmm. Sacha, I would be remiss if I don't ask you about how difficult was it to master, and you do master that accent, which is not just Boston accent. He went to University of California, so it's a little
Abbey
bit of
accent. It's an Abbey accent that belongs entirely to him.
Well, I must say, I was terrified about not only playing an American in a movie, but also somebody with that specific accent, because it's Boston. And then, yes, he went to Berkeley and Brandeis. And so I was so terrified, not only because the cast was dauntingly brilliant and accomplished, that I called up a dialect coach I'd met on the set of Hugo many years beforehand, called Tim Monick. He's the greatest living dialect coach for any of you who haven't heard of him. And essentially he agreed to train me. And what we did was we studied and listened to Abbey and all the available footage that there was. I managed to track down some radio interviews and some speeches that had been recorded on radio. And Abbey, because he was consciously a performer, had two very different timbres to his voice. So he had the Abbey that was just with the rest of the Chicago 7 or 8. And then there was the Abbey who was on stage, who was there as the performer. He had studied stand-up comedy. His aim was to inspire other students and other young people to give up their lives to stop the war in Vietnam. And he did that consciously through wit, comedy, brilliance with language, and a kind of wildly entertaining fluctuation in pitch. So we noticed actually that his accent, would almost go up an octave. So he'd almost be shrieking when he was delivering these speeches. What actually was quite sad was Tim Monick prepared some recordings of him, including some after he'd been released from prison. And when we were listening to them, we realized that he was deflated. When the Abbey that came out after jail was completely different to the Abbey who went in there. And obviously, as you know, Abbey tragically took his own life, later on. So underneath this exuberant clown was this deeply courageous activist who was ready to risk his life and actually ended up dying prematurely. So there's he's a tragic figure.
Aaron, I have to ask you about the music choices. Tell us about working with your composer. In particular, I noticed that there is 4 major moments where music is used: in the opening, then the 2 riots, and then as Tom starts reading the names at the end, there is,
That's right. And that was a big change that was made in post. There were only supposed to be 3 of those moments. And I told Daniel Pemberton, our composer, I told him that I was going to need him to score the prologue, and that, we talked about it a lot, that it was going to need to be ironic, that he shouldn't write to picture, that he should write against picture. It should kind of feel like a party that's getting warmed up. And like I said, temperature rising as we're meeting our guys and we're seeing that there's going to be a train wreck in Chicago. And then the first and the second riot. But I told him that he wasn't going to have the last cue of the film. that I was already planning on using a cover of Here Comes the Sun. That when Tom started reading the names, we were going to hear this cover of Here Comes the Sun, and it was going to feel great, and the clouds were parting. It feels like years since it's been clear, and that was my plan until we got into post, and we're maybe a month and a half or 2 months into post when we finally get to that moment in the film, and we put Here Comes the Sun against it, and it doesn't work at all. Not just the moment, it's like the whole film ended up amounting to nothing. It's a terrifying feeling when you get there. So I went back to Daniel and I said, new plan. I need you to write something better than the Beatles. Okay. I know it sounds like a tall order, but he did. He wrote that cue, which is just right, and it puts a lump in our throat, and it works the way Here Comes the Sun was supposed to.
Mm-hmm. And Jeremy, I want to ask you about the fact that your characters seem to be relishing in the theatricality of the events and the protests, but less concerned about the results. Correct?
I don't think I agree with the final summary. I mean, there is a sense of, as Abby's book is called, one of Abby's books, Revolution for the Hell of It. But I do think that the result and the end game was critical to Jerry. This idea of an interracial humanhood. I think he reveled in I think he found something very life-affirming in the act of protest, and ultimately wanted to free himself from the strictures of 1950s, early 60s middle-class mores. I mean, he came from a middle-class American background and basically believed that the young generation needed to free themselves from the establishment. And so yes, there's a sense of, Jerry's book is called Just Do It. It's not really about what you're doing. It's about, what he says, rise up and abandon the creeping meatball, which, I don't know what that means, but that's what I tried to do in the movie.
Yeah. Well, guys, I have kept you for so long. It's been amazing to have you all. It's one of the best movies of the year. You guys are the best ensemble. And Aaron, you're only getting better. Can't wait.
Roger, thank you very much.
Yes.
Would you do me a favor and say hello to Lisa McCord for me?
I will absolutely do that. Yeah, she is listening, so she might hear you just now.
Oh, Lisa, if you're listening, hi, I miss you.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. You're all terrific. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much.
Cool.
Good seeing you guys.
All right.
See you later.
Hey, guys. Hey, Tony. Hey, Nancy.